Hello, and welcome to the World Built Environment Forum webinar series. My name is Ken Creighton. I am the Director of Thought Leadership and Public Affairs at RICS. And today we're focusing on, can public transport recover from the COVID-19 pandemic? We have over 370 registrations for the webinar this morning, or this evening, or this afternoon, wherever you are, because you all come from 45 different markets around the world. I'd like to now introduce our panel for the conference. First, we have Violetta Bulc, who is Curator of Eco-Civilization and former EU Commissioner for Transport. Welcome, Violetta.
Thank you.
And we have Simon Dixon, Global Transportation Leader at Deloitte. Hello, Simon.
Hi, Ken.
And we have Maria Vasilescu, CEO of Vienna Solutions and former Deputy Mayor of Vienna.
Hello.
Thank you all for being here. Now, to the audience, we welcome your active involvement through this technology. Please do submit questions to the panel. It really helps bring the conversation to life. If you're new to using these webinars, you should see that you can submit questions at any time using the question box on your screen. I will call out questions as they're on topic during the conversation to keep the flow and order as we go through the questions that we've prepared for the panelists. But rest assured, we're going to get to all of your questions. So I'm going to do my best to ensure that we have time after our prepared questions to explore the questions that you ask during this webinar. And even if we can't get to all the questions, we're going to follow up with you on email. So we will get to the questions. And speaking of questions, let's get right to them. So the first question, if I can come to you, Violetta.
Yes, Ken.
What is the new normal going to look like for public transportation?
Well, first of all, hello to everyone who joined us. I'm so happy that this topic is being discussed so widely because it is one of the essential topics for the future, not only for transport, but for the whole society. And I'm also glad that we know that there is no going back. So let's discuss the future. We all know that transport has been severely hit. And let me just set the framework within which I would like to make my comments. I do believe that the future of public transport is in a mix of mass public transport and private mobility solutions that will work together to provide a seamless door-to-door solution on demand. And I think this is a very important message. And of course, personally, I'll share my need is with the choice of the type of vehicle that I need for different types of occasions. So if I start with that, of course, I need to say that an important factor and in this whole game, if transport can have a more sustainable and predictable future than as we are experiencing it during the COVID crisis, I think the local and state governments will play an essential role, especially in understanding the preventive care. I think we've really failed on this one account. We have not focused on preventive care enough and solutions in this pandemic. And I think that the results are really not good. So what do I think that we could potentially do and we can still make a difference in the future? For example, first, to have an intelligent and responsive system-based solution for resilience. I mean, this is something we can get ready now with, because this is not the first, not in the middle pandemic. It will continue to happen in the future. Contingency planning based on organizational design of complex systems. We need that. Why are we not including science in this kind of activities? Of course, transparency, especially in the area of investments. And my big question is, why are we not investing in preventive care? Why are we only focusing on curation of the results and not protecting ourselves better? And of course, regulation that make sure that there are no monopolies. And I do believe that we need to work very closely with regulators to make sure that APIs, application interfaces, are really open and that really we follow that on all levels of services and solutions. Especially that's important for startups and newcomers to be fully included on a competitive basis in the development of transport. And of course, I'm touching here the challenges of a big data and these three major drives right now that we see on a global scale, where we have one stream pushing for corporate-based management of data. We see a state-based stream, and we see European way, which we're trying to focus on consumer rights, on users' rights, and making sure that the user is protected well. So within this framework, I'm inviting everyone to really boldly look for the solutions of public transport in the future.
Thank you, Violetta. It's great insight. I want to offer Simon or Maria an opportunity to jump in before we go to the next question.
Thanks, Ken. Actually, sorry, now, Maria, do I let you go first if you want to say something, rather than me jumping straight in?
Oh, thanks, Simon. As a matter of fact, I just wanted to reflect, upon the strong responsibility of the public hand, and I think that this is a takeaway from what we're experiencing right now. In many cases, public transport was handed over more or less to public companies, and what we can see is that it is a crucial public service, and I personally believe that it is to be dealt with pretty much like we deal with healthcare. So in a sense, returning, to whatever will be normal or the new normal means for me, for one thing, looking into how losses can be compensated, well, by engaging the public hand. And it also means, and I agree with Violetta so much, it means, prevention. And it means also having people within public transport companies looking into resilience and specializing in coping with future crises, because what happened now caught us all, totally unprepared for a shock like this. So realizing that these types of shocks will be recurring is, I think, the most important takeaway from what has happened now.
Thanks, Maria. And let's go to you, Simon, but also maybe we can combine your thoughts with the next slide, which is how can public transport authorities and operators recover financially from the aftermath of COVID-19? So thank you, Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. And great to hear Maria and Violetta's views, which I'm the eternal optimist. So I do think public transport is going to recover and be strong, though it'll be slightly different. I think one of the things which we will see is that perceptions will change. At the moment, we have the world's media, we have every focus on this pandemic, and we've sort of forgotten about all the other risks and all the other things that can kill us. I remember my father saying, life is a fatal disease caught at birth. And I think that when the normality perhaps is people's perceptions coming back to the fact that public transport is actually a really safe way of transport. If you just look what happened in the US every year, there's about 30 to 35,000 deaths on the roads every year in the States. But people were accepting that risk. People get in their cars. People are now in their cars because they sort of perceive that cars are safer than public transport. Well, I would doubt that. But what I do think is going to change is that perhaps the morning peaks and the afternoon peaks on the public transport are probably not going to be as they were before, and that the load will spread out over the day, which I think will be good for the traveling public, and I think it will probably be good for the operators. So I think there's some of the changes in the new normal. And there are some technological things that need to go behind that, but there are also some things the operators, the public transport operators and the private companies that operate public transport need to think about in terms of where they schedule, the way they staff things, the way tickets are booking. One of the problems in this sort of a perceived risk is that everyone has the mental image of the, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use a UK example, but the crowded commuter trains coming in, fighting the Battle of Waterloo, as it's known, with everyone crammed together. Well, I've been commuting into Waterloo for years, and I always get a seat on the train. I just happen to go at a slightly different time, not in the rush hour. And I think that the ability to provide passengers with more information so they can make choices about when they're traveling, plus the new great technologies like the Zoom and the webinars, which are going to enable a more agile form of working. I still think people will be coming back into the offices, but they can be more flexible around it, will allow that spread. So I think that's the bit about the new normal, which then really means is what are the operators going to do to financially benefit? I think they need to look at different sorts of customers. I think in some respects, the regular commuters aren't the most profitable. So looking about attracting more tourists, more people in. I think the climate agenda, which is hugely important, and I think governments and operators need to be stressing that public transport is a very green form of transport, and giving people the choices, their modes, and making decisions. And then finally, the last thing, which is maybe more politically sensitive, is actually using the stick or some form of pricing mechanism to nudge people onto public transport and out of cars. And my great city where I live, London, of course, was one of the pioneers, along with Singapore and Stockholm, in congestion charging to move people onto public transport. So I'll pause there. Sorry for rabbiting on too much.
That's fantastic, Simon. Great insight. And we have Asanka Kumara in the audience commenting, great analysis, Simon. Anonymous automatic public transportation services will be the way to save public money. So great insight from the audience. And Violetta, can I turn to you? I know you have some comments on this theme.
Yeah, I think Simon really brought an important point, which is the people's perception. And I think that fear and just causing a public fear atmosphere really prompted a lot of sort of panic reactions, which I hope that is a good lesson for the future as well. And my question is, if we can go and see a doctor, if we can go, I don't know, to the store, if we can go to the gas station, why wouldn't we be able to use a public transport with all, of course, good preventive cares? Why don't we invest, and this, Simon, maybe you can reply to that, why don't we invest in really good masks? We know that masks and disinfection are two most efficient ways of stopping the spread of the virus. So if we're really in pandemic, why not there? And look how much a public transport can offer these days. I mean, Simon mentioned the investments and the redirection of investments, but I'd like to just mention few, because that is that's where the optimism is coming from. You know, we will see, I'm pretty sure, in the next 10 years, the integration of urban aviation space into the integrated mass solutions, you know, mobility as a service. And we will see a serious mobility as a service on demand being offered. So let's not scare people. I mean, we have preventive measures to ensure that the public transport is safe, but we need to, you know, use them, not just wait for pharmaceutical companies to provide the solutions, because this can go in parallel. And I'm really inviting transport community to be a little bit more present and to work together in a dialogue and really take an active role in finding the solutions.
I love what you said, Violetta, and I think I keep on saying it all the time, is this integration of transport, public transport, seamless, integrated, multimodal is the way ahead. Too often in transport, you've had the bus people only thinking about bus solutions, you've had the rail people only about rail, you've had the metros about metros. And as you said, it's about seamlessly moving people and goods from place to place in the most efficient manner. And therefore the public transports of the future, the ones that are going to be much better are going to be more integrated. And I think technology in terms of ticketing and allowing, as you said, this mobility as a service to enable people to choice, to move around efficiently. And just as one example of a region, the Brussels region, they're trying to roll out their smart.move program, which I think is probably the most innovative and world leading. And I sort of look at that. They've got a low emission zone, which they enforce by cameras, and they're now rolling out an app-based, smartphone-based mobility as a service, congestion pricing, all of which is doing a huge amount of the good things that Violetta said.
And if I may add something to this, Maria here, I agree with everything. I just have the feeling that when fear, the atmosphere of fear gradually resides, because societies are getting also used to this new situation. What will happen is that we will experience people returning to public transport because it is yet the cheaper and most convenient way to move within cities and regions. And I just wanted to add to this that mobility as a service is actually the only way to go about in the future, not just for the times after the pandemic. It's the only way to organize mobility, also in terms of climate neutral cities and the whole idea of a climate neutral future.
I think it's the customer centricity, sorry for a sort of buzzword, because too often in the past, transports have been run for the benefit of people running them. There's old blokes who like playing with buses and trains. And I've heard people say it'd be so much easier to run this metro if it wasn't for the passengers, which really sort of is the point. And therefore, we as customers are used to things on demand, to be able to access easy ticketing, easy travel, easy booking, seamless. So why can't we do that with public transport?
Exactly. And one last comment from my side is because one of the biggest challenges right now, which I'm happy that even EU is now addressing, and I'm looking forward to this new urban mobility strategy that is coming beginning next year, but is this e-mobility, which everybody started to buy in, but we are lacking like a roaming type of solution for the charging of e-mobility. And this is something that I'm inviting the players to really focus on, to ensure interoperability also in a charging system for e-mobility. And then we will have a really integrated solution, Simon, that you're talking about, and it will be easy to use, and people will move into these solutions even more eagerly, because right now it's really not a pleasant experience when you try to charge your e-car. Yeah, so
that's right. And the first mile, last mile is something that people, we think we need to get. I mean, one of the reasons too many people get in their cars is it's difficult to get to the bus station or the train station. And so they get in the car and then they don't get out of the car. And I think, that ability to the active travel, walking, but I think the e-scooters, the micro-mobility is going to add to it. And all those things to encourage this mix of transport modes to get people, and reflecting that not everyone can be a mammal, middle-aged men in lycra, and get on a bicycle, but some people will need on-demand shuttles. There's a brilliant pilot going on in Sydney in Australia where you use your transport, your e-card, as Violetta said, to book a shuttle, an on-demand shuttle that picks you up your houses and just takes you to the outer train stations to get into the Transport for New South Wales metro system.
Exactly, door-to-door service, door-to-door service.
And on that theme, let's hover here a moment, because it is very interesting. And we've had a comment really about the urban-rural view of this. And David Ondemand says, and his example is in the UK, but I think this is a globally relevant point he makes. He says, how can you nudge people out of cars when there are poor transportation links in many areas? It's okay basing everything on the London experience, but the UK is not just London, believe it or not. This London-centric view is laughable and excludes many who don't live in large cities. Then again, these people are not interested in anything outside of their latte sipping metropolitan bubbles. And so, and I think he's making a point about the non-urban areas. And I wonder if anybody had a comment about that.
I think he's got a very good point. And whilst I live in London, I'm definitely not a metropolitan elite. I think there is too much focus on the cities, and a lot of people live outside. So one of the things is, what is the blend? And this, what I think Violetta, Maria, and I have been saying, is the blend of transport modes that get you around. And actually, you can't afford to put metros and trains and everything everywhere. You know, what is the role of buses? I think buses perhaps, you know, can play more of a role in the rural areas, but also then what if we have to use cars, which we absolutely have to, because you can't afford to put a public transport service to everyone's door who live all around in rural areas, not just in the UK. So how do you make that the car-based into something that is efficient and sustainable? So that could be maybe more on demand for cars picking up, but really making sure that we have either the hydrogen fuel cell cars or the battery vehicles, so that when people do need to use cars, they're actually a sustainable form of transport, but then link them in to when they can use public transport for part of the journey. That's easy, because whoever made the point, it's a brilliant one. If you're living out in Middle Wallop or somewhere in the sticks, there isn't a bus or a metro.
Let me Simon, I think you just... Because, Ken, because there's been a lot done already, and it's an excellent question, and I'd like to give a bit of hope to our listener, because smart village concept is really now, you know, broadening its wings, if I can say so, not beyond European borders. And in the smart village concept, one of the key elements is also smart mobility. And mobility as a service is actually an excellent opportunity to bring public transport back to remote areas, to rural areas, for many different reasons. One is personal needs, of course, that we offer with the service on demand, a much more efficient and also price attractive solution. But on the other hand, we see, especially in these pandemic times, that we really need good integrated logistic networks that connect rural areas with the cities in a smooth and efficient way, because cities depend on the supply of food from countryside. If this is the only, but for me, very important motivating element. So I invite everyone to really take on board the smart city, smart village integration models, and besides energy, digital, social services, really strongly support also this mobility on demand element, which will then make the countryside much more attractive. And I know that one of the key sort of services of urban aviation solutions, which are now emerging, and I know that by 2030 we will have urban aviation services available beyond just emergency services. The attraction of it is to connect remote areas, because you don't even need to build the infrastructure. So we will see very exciting new business modelings happening in public transport in the next 10 years.
And if
Thank
I may
you, Violetta. Maria, please.
Yes, thank you. I think it is also a matter of a political decision. I mean, there will be considerable funds spent in recovery projects, and everybody's talking about green recovery right now. So in the end, it's a decision not to spend money on new road projects, as it will be done, unfortunately, in some parts of Europe. But spending it on connections, on improving connections between rural areas and cities. And I think this will happen, to be honest, improving pretty much the situation between, within entire regions.
Great point. We've had a few comments that are very relevant to these points. So for example, Marianne says rural transport, take Switzerland as an example, very integrated public transportation system that provides at the very least a bus from every village to the node that allows connections to other buses or trains. It's perfectly possible to live almost anywhere in Switzerland without a private car. We have a question about public transport in the last mile, especially with those with babies and shopping bags. And then from Berga, and maybe there's a comment about that. But then also, I think as a segue, I want to understand that Malcolm has a specific question about driverless cars and the disruption that they might cause to public transport. So there's a real a theme here, and I'm wondering if one of you wants to jump into that.
I would like to say something about driverless cars. I think that they are an immense opportunity for improving the whole idea of public transport, and as a matter of fact also for improvement projects in public space. Why? Because if you plan for it the right way, it means that you may be able to call a driverless car that will pick you up at your door, will bring you to the next public transport station where you may switch, talking about seamless integration, and then it will drive away, and in case it is not needed, it will go by itself somewhere underground and park itself, which means that they do not only improve once again the whole idea of mobility on demand services and integration of different modes, but they also save space in public space that can be reallocated for other uses. Because right now, if we try to do new public space design, placemaking, and we will be needing more space for other uses, also because of new trends of spending more and more time outdoors, we always have a problem of reallocating space because of parking cars. So I see an immense opportunity for the future in automated cars.
Great. Okay, so why don't we move on to the next formal question? And I do have a few questions from the audience that relate to this, and let me read them out. But the next question, and I'll turn to you, Simon, is how is COVID-19 likely to affect the way public transportation infrastructure projects are assessed and decided? And just to give you a flavor of what some people are thinking, we have a great comment from Glenn who says, is it inevitable that governments will have to increase subsidies to fund and develop public transport long-term to ensure it returns and grows to achieve zero carbon targets? And then also we have Jason with an angle on this, interesting regarding public and private, saying, having lived in both the UK and Japan, the approach to public transport were worlds apart. In Japan, the system was run for the benefit of the passengers. In Japan, the income from tickets were used to maintain and update the public transport system, leading to an efficient system where trains and buses ran on time, city and rural. In the UK, public transport is run for the benefit of private companies, whose priority is understandably their profit margin. This has led to chronic underfunding for maintenance and upgrading, which puts people off using public transport. So, Simon, do you want to jump into that?
Wow, there's so many good questions and points. I mean, the way public transport, the projects are funded. So, I'm not sure it's really COVID. I just think of all the other things that people have been talking about, is that the way the transport infrastructure projects are being funded will change. I think there's potentially going to be more of a public-private mix. What's the government good at and what's the private sector good at? I think certainly in the UK, the government has rewritten the Treasury Green Book, which is the rules around how transport projects are assessed, and I think the government in the UK's levelling up agenda is part of that driving, so that they're seeing public transport infrastructure projects as being economy stimulators, but also they're better in the social aspect of enabling people. Transport isn't just so you can have a new train, and that point about the customer centricity, it's not so you can have just a new shiny train or bus. It's actually so you can connect people from where they live to where they're educated, where they get their healthcare, where they get their employment and their leisure. So doing that, I think the type of projects and what they're assessed and the relative merits may change. So traditionally people think about rail, high-speed rail, it's big, it takes a lot of time, it's hugely expensive. And perhaps there may be this shift of the dial towards other transport infrastructure projects like bus rapid transit, which actually move people really efficiently and are a lot quicker to build and implement. And they're a bit more flexible when things need to change. South America is probably one part of the globe that's really good at that. So I think there may be more of the bus rapid transit and some of the projects that support the first mile, last mile. In terms of the funding, you know, and someone said about, you know, one of the audience asked about, you know, the pricing and what drives profit margins. I think public transport operators are needing to think about other ways of funding other than just the fare box. So I think there's more things such as the transit-oriented development, the land value capture, you know, marketing, advertising, some of the different ways in which money can be raised. And then you have, there's a more central government, the pricing function. And do we come to a stage in countries around the world where it's seen as, instead of the funding for the roads coming from gas tax or vehicle excise duty, it actually comes from some form of distance-based charging, i.e. you pay to use the roads in the same way you pay to use the rail, or you pay to get on a ship or a plane. So there's some of the things that are different. The way that the rail industry, which I think may be behind the question about, is it the profit margin for the private companies? I think certainly in the UK, there's a lot of work going on the future of rail. And you can see that in some countries, you know, they may have a slightly better balance. In other countries, they've got worse. So I do think there's going to be a shaking up of what the role of the public sector is, the private sector, and then hence the way the business case is and the assessment where the projects are funded and what sort of projects are funded. Sorry, long-winded answer, but there was a lot to try and cover.
Yeah.
Can I come in with very quickly, because Simon kind of led me into one thought, which it connects to the questions of Switzerland and also the comment of Japan. I think these two countries are a really good example, proving that and understanding the broader meaning of public transport for the benefit of the society as a whole, economy and well-being of people. And you can quickly calculate the positive effects, which are not maybe in a tangible form, but in a more indirect form, but they contribute to the sort of stability, predictability, and in a way also transparency of the way how public life works. And that is very positive for the society as a whole. And I think still, while UK was part of the EU, we really pushed for this integrated transport union, if you want, where everything is now walking towards the full integration, is walking towards a green and sort of sustainable model. Yet, of course, no matter how much we try, we're not going to be able to do it overnight. So this zero net effect by 2050 is a realistic goal. But while I'm saying that, I'd like to comment on one of the listeners' comment, where he was asking about subsidies versus are they going to be the savior? I have to say very clearly that subsidies just increase the public debt. I'm very much in favor of incentives. Let's reward those that move forward. Let's reward and stimulate the transition and not try to prevent the old world. And I know from my own experience, during my mandate, we, after all, were able to invest 240 billion euros of in European public transport. And the reason why we were able to achieve that is because we started to really build predictable and transparent sector. And let's not really fall into a trap again of fear, of chaotic and a really old mindset. I mean, we have a unique opportunity now to be brave, to be bold, and to really use the learnings from the past to improve the future, not to take it back to something that it didn't work. So yes, investments, yes, incentives, yes, transparency, and yes, integration.
Thank you, Violetta. And I think you answered a question that was asked by Patty, which I'll read out to thank Patty for the question. Should public transport be free to all users? Certain age groups in Scotland already get free travel. We need to encourage a move away from individual car use and the problems it brings, such as the amount of land dedicated to tarmac, the pollution, including rubber from tires, even something as simple as brake dust, having a serious effect on the environment. So I think you comment on that already, Violetta, but I don't know if you have any other thoughts.
No, I mean, we just need to keep in mind that there is 1 trillion euros of negative externalities per year in European overall, including Great Britain transport sector. So there is just so much opportunity to improve our environment, the way how we engage in transport. And what we've talked today about is mobility as a service, e-mobility. All this is very clear commitment from the public and from the industries and governments that we know that this is the future. But let me just add one thing here, is that the only way we can do that is that the transport becomes an integrated horizontal part of the public solutions. We cannot exclude transport and just keep it as in a silos, because the real effects, positive effects of investments into more resilient, green, safe, and inclusive transport are really in social services, in health, in GDP of the whole country, in the performance of companies. So somehow we were invited to make the next step in the modeling of our societies to be more sensitive for these mutual horizontal effects that we have in each other, and then the transport will not have a problem with investments at all.
Great, thank you, Violetta. Maria, could we turn to you with the next planned question on the slide? This is about changing patterns, and are city mobility planners looking at the change in travel behavior and modes brought about by COVID-19 as temporary or longer term, and planning accordingly? We touched on some of these themes about urban mobility and so forth, but I wonder if you could share your thoughts.
Well, I would like perhaps to return to what we were talking about before briefly, because I disagree a tiny bit with Violetta on one issue. I think that organizing public transport, the best way to go about it is a PPP, and I disagree with the idea of the public hand retreating completely from this. So if I may invite us to Austria, and specifically Vienna, the public transport company there belongs 100% to the city, which enabled us, for instance, to focus entirely on customer service, which then means that whatever revenue there is reinvested 100% in public transport, plus the public hand, in this case the city, investing in addition. And this enabled us, for instance, to introduce an annual ticket for 365 euro, which means that for €1 per day, you can use one of the densest public transport systems that there are in the world, which is not only a huge success, but it proved to be very resilient right now throughout the COVID crisis in terms of revenue, because at least these parts of revenue remained stable, because we have almost 900,000 owners of public transport annual cards. So this is just, to give you another perspective. There are, I think, different ways to go about it, but what
Maria, could I just ask you, where was the disagreement? Because I never talked about the ownership. I mean, the ownership being public or private doesn't make any difference. They both can be very efficient. It depends on the management.
No, because you talked about subsidies, and Vienna. I mean, half of what is spent on public transport is a subsidy on behalf of the city, and the other half comes from revenue. And I do not think that revenue is enough. But that's a discussion in itself.
I see. Thank you for clarification.
No, pleasure. And I just wanted to know, in a sense, this leads us also to the idea of planning for the next 10 years. Because, I mean, there is, for one thing, right now, an opportunity to focus on different types of projects. Simon mentioned this already. So not focus entirely on heavy rail and metro line extensions, but on, I call these softer types of mobility, more flexible ones. And it may be a bus rapid transit, it may be a tramway, it may be different types of buses. And yet again, we talked about mobility as a service and on-demand services. It's also a chance to, well, let's say in many cases, cities were forced to look into metro lines, for instance, that were so heavily used in rush hour that they had to invest on this. And right now, this means resources that can be reinvested in other types of mobility or filling in gaps. So in a sense, post-pandemic era brings more flexibility, I think. I mean, we plan in 10-year cycles. So we know that gradually, I think we will return to rush hour. And I do not believe that home office will stay up to a certain extent, but gradually schools will open up. And once again, public transport will fill up again. But I think when it comes to planning, once again, for the next 10 years, it is about renewing infrastructures, it's about filling in gaps, and it is about congestion charge, mobility as a service, and on-demand services that I believe are crucial parts of actually achieving this idea of seamless integration and door-to-door services.
I think the planners, I hopefully they're getting away, you know, what Maria and Violetta said about thinking about long-term and integrated, because there's been a bit of a fad, and it's often hyped up by the media in that, you know, oh, it's all about cycling. So suddenly every road is being turned into a cycle lane, which not everyone can cycle. You know, there are older people who just physically can't cycle. But then in the narrowing, and if you're not planning in an integrated system, you then get, because people have to use their cars and the others, you get congestion, and the congestion is bad for air quality. So we're not doing. So it's planning, again, a horrible phrase, but a holistic mobility system. The other thing which I think is important is perception, because you know, Maria mentioned it about buses and trams, but the perception of a bus is often bad, except in as few places in the world. I mean, you know, London, it's easy to get the bus, but if you go to New York, so I was doing some work in New York, and people were saying, Simon, only poorer people get the bus, and I'm thinking, why is that? And in parts of the UK, it's the same. So how do you make buses a really good part of the transportation system that cater for people with disabilities, that are clean, that have Wi-Fi on, that run routes where they're needed? And I think that's something about the public-private mix. So to give you an apologies, it's a UK example, but in London, the buses are centrally controlled by London, and it's a franchise model. So the authority says, these are where the buses are going, and this is the price, this is the standard ticket price. In other parts where there isn't that model, the private sector bus companies decide when they want to run the routes, how much they charge, all of which makes it difficult to have integrated ticketing, and it's confusing to the public. So therefore, I do think there's perhaps, and hopefully Manchester is one of the cities that is moving to try and get what they call bus franchising, because I think that allows a really nice mix between some public sector, a little bit, this is where we need the routes to go, and this is the overall price, and then the private sector efficiently providing clean buses, hydrogen fuel cell buses, which then will be able to satisfy the demand.
Well, maybe I can just come in with a quick comment on that, because there are many places within the EU where integrated ticketing is already working. They even have, we have places like Luxembourg where you even have a free public transport. But I think the attitude towards public transport shows you and tells you a lot about the overall attitude towards people. You know, because we know that usually socially more deprived people, because they cannot afford a car, they use public transport. Why don't we make it nice for them, for ourselves who are green and are they want to be conscious about the environment? This is the second segment that is also hit by bad public transport. I mean, it tells you a lot about social inclusion. It tells you a lot about the care for the environment. It tells you a lot about who matters how much to the society as a whole. So I think we have a unique opportunity, and as I was introduced at the beginning as a curator of eco-civilization, we do have a unique opportunity now to rethink our relationships and to rethink what a good country is all about. And the examples around the world are showing us bigger the gap between poor and rich, more troubles. So why do we want troubles? So I'm very much inviting governments, companies to really show by example and through the investments in public transport, what is the society that they we want to live in the future.
Such an important point, Violetta. And it really is the focus of the next formal question about impact that changing travel usage will have on sustainability and inclusivity. I wonder if you or other speakers had any more comments about those important issues.
I think it's back to a comment that one of the audience made about the difference between the urban centres and the outer, and the difference, you know. So in terms of retail, which we're keen to get our town centres. So in the town centres, footfall tends to be better for local businesses, but it's not so good for the big out of town stores or malls. So therefore, you're thinking about what's the most appropriate, you know, retail transport modes to connect people to the retail, whether it's in a city where it's easier to walk or get the public transport, or whether it's in the out of town where actually a car or a bus service to a big shopping center might be a more efficient way of doing it. So but people being provided with the information about the cost, the speed, and the emissions or sort of environmental aspects of their journey choices, I think will help in this. You know, because at the moment there's a lot of, we're creatures of habit, we humans, and therefore you just do what you've always done, and therefore the information is going to help us make better informed choices, which are unique to where we live.
Yeah, great. Something to be optimistic about.
Maybe a good example of that is the connection with the high-speed train, Eurostar, between London, Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam. And nobody even thinks about using aviation for that purpose. So because there was a really efficient alternative given, people switched with, you know, not even thinking for a second. So, and the same is the connection with on other distances, which are up to, like, say, 500-600 kilometers. I think we will see the shift in offering in the future, either in a form of transport or some sort of hyperloop new technology solution in the future. And that will also contribute to encourage people to switch to public transport, because trains come in the city. You don't need to spend first 1 hour to get to the airport, but airports will be feeding these big, huge hubs where people will then use other forms of public transport to get home. So, you know, sometimes we are a bit nervous about this, because I tell you, to build one good railway system, it takes at least 20 years, even for one track, you know, because of all the work that is associated with it. So we need to keep the big picture in mind and the long-term planning. And I'm very optimistic. I think transport will get out of this crisis with a very good learnings and lessons, and will capitalize them in a better solution in the future.
So here's a thought: why not make the public transport hubs also really good places to do the click and collect? Because at the moment, you know, on online shopping, everything gets delivered to our door, it's probably not the most efficient use of the road space, and it's probably not the best environmental solution. So why not have your packages delivered to secure click and collect, which you can pick up on the way home? And then if you really, really want them delivered to your door, you might have to pay a bit more. And for those
That's where drones come in, Simon. That's what drones will do.
And then, yeah, and then for those areas in the countryside, actually, why not use the petrol stations as the places where people can go and collect their parcels? So I think, you're thinking about all the different aspects that, public transport is just one thing of this overall mobility mix, which includes energy policy as well as public transport policy.
Great point, Simon. And actually, our next formal question touches on that. And maybe I'll turn to Maria. It's about changing travel patterns affecting our high streets, towns, and cities. What are the impacts? And you just named a few. But Maria, welcome you to share any thoughts.
Well, I would say, as things are developing right now, I think it's a little bit bad news for CBDs and downtowns. And what I hear also from many US cities is that they're experiencing trouble right now with downtowns, empty shops, empty downtowns anyway. But it's good news for residential neighborhoods. And I think it's also good news for rural areas, because even though I do not believe that we're all going to be working from home and spend the rest of our lives in pajamas, more or less, I do believe that home office will remain, at least to some extent, which is yet again a good chance for developing areas that used to be more or less entirely residential or abandoned before. So I think that this is something that leads to new types of planning. It means mixed-use areas, so no tie cities, no pajama cities anymore, but more, especially when planning new urban quarters, looking into different types of uses and integrating them straight from the beginning. It also means, a chance for co-working spaces and different types of shared services. And Simon mentioned before, the idea of being able to collect your parcels at public transport stations or these types of hubs. Let's say it's not just public transport, it is integrated mobility points, because I think that this is the future when looking into how are we going to be planning. It means once again hubs where you have the integration of different mobility modes and where you can actually collect your passages, or even better, you can have a neighbor who will just drop by and bring it to you, because there are numerous apps that may help you organize community services on top of all.
We should meet up again in a year, because I think we will be much more back in the offices. I think human nature and the need to get together will actually encourage people. I think there's a pent-up demand for us to get away from our living at work, which is what I call working from home.
I agree. I agree with you absolutely, because it actually leads to places that are not places anymore. So I think that we will be back in our offices, and especially we will be back in our offices as soon as schools open again. But may I add to all this that I personally think that what is most probably the most crucial problem for downtowns right now is tourism, or let's say the lack of it. So this is also something that we have not looked into today. It means, of course, loss of revenue for public transport companies, and it means abandoned downtowns right now and touristic areas. It will take, I think, about 2 to 3 years, until things return more or less to normal, or to almost what we used to call normal before.
Great, thank you, Maria. We have just a minute or so left before we close, and we had a final question about cities sharing best practice, but maybe we just go through each speaker to see if you have any final thoughts, just for a few seconds. Violetta?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this discussion. It's most needed, and I hope our audience has gained from it. But my last thought is, yes, integrated services, yes, integrated mobility as a whole, as Maria has said. The biggest transformation is happening right now in cargo sector, in logistic networks, the distribution of value generation and the use in these value networks. And here I would very much appeal to everyone to make sure that the local businesses are included, that we don't become just a huge global multinational network sort of logistic services, but that we really can pay attention to local businesses, to local distribution networks, which can be much more responsive, they can be much more tailored, and they can really address the hands-on needs of users, being individual or business users. So that's something we have not covered, but I think it's an important element of the overall solution.
Well, we are running short on time.
I'll be very quick. I think the future of public transport is very bright, but it'll be different, it'll be better, it'll be more integrated, but different countries around the world, different cities, country regions will implement things differently to suit their national characteristics and way of life.
Great.
And for me, just
Maria?
to put it in just one example, besides, the whole issue of affordability, mobility as a service, integrated services, we've talked about this for so long today. I ran across a very good example in Copenhagen. It's called the A and B Society, and it's about organizing, for instance, schools opening up at different times, and organizing businesses opening up at different times, so as to avoid, for instance, rush hours. And I think that this kind of flexibility will also be part of an improved future for public transport.
Thank you. Well, I need to thank the panel. You three have been absolutely fantastic. I love your insight and the rapport, and your jumping in and making this hour just a tsunami of incredible thoughts that you've shared. So thank you deeply. I want to remind everybody that we'll publish a recording and a written summary of this webinar, and please feel free to share it with your professional networks. As we close, let me, first of all, also invite you to complete the online poll, which will appear on your screens at the end of the webinar. Please do fill that out. Also, join us later this month for a special WBEF webinar series. Joe Biden will soon celebrate his 100th day in the White House. So how is he performing against his promises to build back better? Visit us in that webinar to register. You can find that at rics.org/WBEF/webinars. The inaugural RICS Global Infrastructure Conference takes place next month. It will feature a special WBEF curated panel discussing ESG investment in the sector. Please visit our Twitter feed for more information. You can find that at WBEF Community. And importantly, the World Built Environment Forum Global Summit will be visiting Dubai as part of the Expo 2020 Dubai event, and that's in January of 2022. The program is going to focus on livable cities, stable, smart, and healthy. Register your interest and find out more about this great event visiting rics.org/WBEF. Also, follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, where you can receive news about upcoming webinars and you won't miss out on anything. And definitely download the app, the WBEF app. There's the picture from the Apple Store or Google Play, and so you don't miss out on any of this great thought leadership. And so with that, I just want to again deeply thank our panel. I just thought it was fantastic. You were fantastic. And I will leave you all to say goodbye. Thanks for the questions. For those we didn't address, we will get back to you in writing. Thank you all.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks.
Thank you.